Hey, beer appreciators! Swaddy Krab. Welcome to Beer Time Story, the platform where beer and brewing knowledge is shared. For today's session, it can be viewed as an extended edition of the episode 2 in season 1, where we had Jamil Zeinasheff on and talk about English ale and its charismatic test. But for this time, we will highlight one particular type of beer caretaking and serving, and we will have some good burps about the unique beauty of British Cat's Ale. Speaking of Cat's Ale, some of us may have seen a documentary of pubs in UK or have even experienced it yourself, where they have a strange beer serving setup, with those weird tall hand pull handle and strange swan neck like so-called faucet. With a couple of stroke of that pulling of that handle, you will have this fascinating and cascading pour of beer in your glass, which is really tempt you, to enjoy it. What a tradition! But it is pretty tough to admit that this kind of tradition has slowly been, fading from the modern day society, and without any countermeasures, soon it's probably going to be forgotten. But luckily, there are groups of people that stand ground for this matter and act to not only preserve this unique tradition, but also to keep it relevant to the present day, as well as to the upcoming future, which our guest speaker happens to be the one in the front line of this battle. So let me introduce him to all of us. With a journalism educational background, he began his career as a columnist for food magazines. Then, during the early days of online food media, in 2011, he joined Jamie Oliver Group as their business editor, and that was where he met his partner in crime, Brad. Besides from his day job, he has a deep passion for beers, and in 2014, with his partner in crime, they founded a YouTube channel that is dedicated to beer named Craft Beer Channel, which is one of the most incredible channels about beer at all time out there. Now, YouTube is not just the only route of communication for his love of beer. He's also a freelance writer as well as a photographer, and he has also been translating his passion and curiosity for beers in writing formats as well, which resulted in many great books such as A Year in Beer in 2021 and the most recent one, The Meaning of Beer in 2014. Lastly, as I mentioned earlier, he's in the front line of the battle to preserve Cask Ale tradition. What I meant by that is he's one of the initiators of the campaign to get Cask Ale recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage, which we will hear more about it in this session. So please welcome our guest speaker, Jonny Garrett.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
Hello, Jonny. Welcome to the platform. We made it, man. Finally.
Yeah, there's been a bit of back and forth, but we're here, and I think this is the moment where we save Cask. I think this is the one.
Yes, this is the one. This is the one. Cool. Did I get your surname right, Garrett?
You did,
Garrett.
Yeah, all good. And
okay.
You were reminding me of parts of my history I'd entirely forgotten. So I appreciate that wonderful rundown of my career.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure. I try to keep it concise, but need to, stress or emphasize those highlights. Can't be missed.
Exactly. Many highlights and indeed lowlights, but we won't go into those bits.
Indeed. So I believe you are live from your brew studio, right? That setup is very familiar.
Yeah, so I built this entire building and installed this brewery behind me. And then there's a video of it on YouTube. It was, as a man who is not practical, it was quite the challenge. But yeah, it's a great space to work and a great space to film as well.
Excellent. So how's London today? You in London, right?
Just outside of London, yeah. So I live in the beautiful countryside of Hertfordshire, just north of London. But spend a lot of my time in London because that is, where a lot of the battle for Cask Ale is sort of happening. Although London's going through a tough time, just generally, not just Cask, in terms of its beer culture. A lot of breweries closing and such. So, really, sort of the heartlands of brewing in the UK at the moment are up north.
Yeah, it seems like those kind of challenge. I mean, we all have been facing that challenge in the beer industries worldwide, but we're gonna get through them together. I'm pretty
Yeah, I
sure.
mean, people forget beer is cyclical. It's been around for about
Yes.
13,000 years, and
Yeah.
there'll be more
True.
boom times to come, and those will probably be followed by crashes like we're experiencing now. Yeah.
Yeah. For real. For real. Okay. You know, like by seeing that background, your homebrewing setup and all this kind of uh geeky stuff, are you like currently working on any particularly interesting project or documentary that you can give us some sneak peek?
Yeah, so we threw absolutely everything that we had into Keep Cask Alive Series 2 at the
Hmm.
start of this year. So we took a bit of time in the summer to
Hmm.
relax a little bit. So we've just started ramping things up again. So we've got projects with American hop growers where we're hoping to tell some stories
Hmm.
about American hops. We're working on Keep Cask Alive Series 3 already and got some
Great.
really exciting stories that we're putting together. The only one we can announce right now is St. Austell, who we just did a video where we actually spent a day as cask ale brewers. So
Hmm.
I broke one of the biggest cask lines in the country a couple of weeks ago, which my immediate thought, terribly, was this is good for YouTube at least,
Right.
not great for the production of cask ale. And then we're also working on some pretty cool stuff, hopefully for Fuller's as well, Fuller's Brewery. So a lot of cask stuff, and then a lot of American IPA stuff, which is along with a great love of lager, sort of where mine and
Hmm.
Brad's real passions lie, sort of cask ale, American IPA, and beautiful Czech lager.
That's awesome. I just have to keep my eyes open and wait for all those awesome content from you guys to enjoy
Yeah.
and appreciate.
Well,
That's
thanks
cool.
for
That's
watching.
cool. Sure. You know, like before we dive down the prepared topic for this session, I would like to ask you a little bit about the beginning of your love for beer as a warm up exercise. So, Johnny, like, how were you drawn into the world of beer and brewing in the first place?
So to keep this answer as short as possible, I write a whole chapter about it in The Meaning of Beer, my latest book. But it starts with my dad's sort of ritual of having, after he got back from work, he'd have one beer a day. It was a terrible beer called Beer Door that you could buy in supermarkets here in the UK.
Hmm.
And that always intrigued me as a kid, why he'd drink it, particularly once I tasted it and was like, this is disgusting. I was like, why are you doing this to yourself?
Right.
But really, it sort of started when I started working in pubs to fund my degree. So I started
Hmm.
working at basically my local pub nearest to my house. It was a Green King pub, so served lots of pints of Green King IPA, and started to get into cask ale rather than sort of the macro lagers that were on the bar, and started to understand that actually beer could be delicious if it was good stuff and if it was well cared for,
Hmm.
and that just sort of piqued my interest in cask ale, and that really stayed as just something I enjoyed on a weekend for quite a long time. And what changed was I was living in London by this point, and a brewery called Camden Town Brewery opened literally round the
Hmm.
corner from me, and they were making really quite good lagers and great American style beer. And we started going there all the time to drink that beer super fresh and learning what that really meant. You know, drinking
Hmm.
fresh, well made, at that time small batch beer. It's now owned by AB InBev and is everywhere. Um,
Right.
and that was sort of where it really kicked off. And that got me excited about American beer. It got me excited about hoppier cask ale, I would say. So things like Oakham
Hmm.
Citra
Hmm.
and stuff were a big part of it. And then when I
Right.
joined Jamie Oliver and met Brad, and we just kept every Friday going for a burger and a beer in a pub. And decided that with all the broadcast equipment that Jamie had in our office, like a full-on
Hmm.
studio that we could film in, maybe we
Right.
could combine sort of our love of writing and filmmaking with our amateur love of beer, and it sort
Uh-huh.
of
Uh-huh.
snowballed from there with a little bit of help from Jamie at the start as well.
That's great. That's great. I mean, it's awesome to hear the concise stories of how you fell in love to beer. And for our listener, if you want a full stories, just go check Johnny books out. Yeah, it's gonna be a rad one, man. Okay, okay, excellent. I think we are ready for the main course. The beauty of cask ales, of course. That's the topic that brought us together today. So, Johnny, let's kickstart the conversation with this set of fundamental questions first. Just to give an audience a brief background of cask ale. So what even, I have to steal this title from your show. I mean, like, what even is cask ale, and how is it different from other beers?
Yeah, so cask ale is essentially the way that beer would have been served for many centuries before kegs and bottles became really commonplace. So essentially, the difference with cask ale between other beers is that it is naturally carbonated in the container from which it's served. So that last bit of CO2 goes into beer to make the beer fizzy in the pub. And this seems like quite a nuanced distinction. You might think as a drinker, well, what does that really mean, and why is that important? And this is the message I think that's got really lost and confused and a bit too technical as we've sort of struggled with cask ale. But what it really means is that the beer does not finish fully fermenting until it's in the pub. And this has a great benefit in that it means that the beer is about as fresh as it could possibly be. Because it's natural carbonation, it also means that carbonation is not only a little bit lower, usually, depends how much sugar and yeast there is, but it also means that those bubbles are often much finer and feel much softer. So it's kind of a more a smoother kind of drinking experience. In fact, Guinness, the Nitro Guinness, was created to try and mimic the texture of cask ale. And then it comes with all these wonderful benefits of being fresh and beautifully carbonated, but it has massive drawbacks, which we'll also probably have to talk about throughout this, which is that if it's not properly cared for, you can end up with very flat beer, you can end up with oxidized beer, that is essentially nowhere near as good as, you know, a force carbonated, potentially keg beer. So really, it's about that final step. It is about that idea of naturally carbonating it and then serving it straight away. But obviously, you know, every time you change, you know, the serving method, you have to change everything that comes before it. So although there's no definitions of cask, you know, cask is not a style of beer. You know, bitter, porter, these are styles of beer. It's not a style of beer. It's a format. It's a serving method. So you can put anything that you want into a cask and serve it that way. But typically we found that sort of British tastes and culture has aligned with cask ale. And so we have gone for stuff that we love to drink, strengths that we love to drink. You know, British beer is pretty famous for being quite low in ABV, and that really works on cask. It also means we make the most of our ingredients. So, you know, the best bitter is malted yeast forward style, and that's because we had incredible yeasts and we still have the best malt in the world. So you have to use certain methods to get the most out of those ingredients and indeed out of that serving format, and that's what comes together to create what we call cask ale culture. So it's the styles and the serving method, and indeed the places you drink it, like pubs, rolled in together.
Right. So like what you mentioned and state earlier, that it is not a particular style, but it's just a format of caretaking of the beer from the brewery and then passed down through the pub, where it got dispensed with a proper care and proper equipment setup and a proper serving techniques. You're gonna get a beautiful ale or beer in the glass for consumer to enjoy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when I say we, I'll almost always mean me and Brad. We genuinely believe that cask ale at its best is the best way to serve pretty much any beer. There's obviously exceptions to that, but it you know, we fetishize freshness in IPAs and in lagers, but really, you know, the lifespan of a beer, once you pour that first pint, because you're pulling oxygen in as you do it. So it's not like a keg, like a key keg where you're just emptying a bag, or like a steel keg where you're pulling in CO2. You're pulling in oxygen, and that changes the beer. And over about 3 to 4 days, it will probably ruin the beer. It will turn it, you know, acetobacter will take hold. It will turn to vinegar. So we really have to fetishize freshness in cask ale, because it has essentially a 48 to 72 hour shelf life once you pour that first pint. But those first pints coming out of that cask is as good as beer gets.
So the window for the freshness is pretty tight, right? So the pub has to, not only the pub, the brewery has to time it right in order for the pub to receive the one that doesn't need much, what is it called? The cellar sitting time, longer than what it should be, right? And the pub itself has to align the serving orders of, you know, the cask beer that they have, in order to make sure that the window of the freshness is properly present to the consumer in a timely manner?
Yeah, so I think in the UK, and we've been guilty of it at some points, we sort of we romanticize this care of cask. We romanticize the sort of the artistic nature that goes into it. And there's definitely art in brewing. I wouldn't say there's any art in cellarmanship. You know, cellarmanship is incredibly hard to do, but it's a logistical nightmare. You know, it's making sure that you order your beer from the brewery at the right time. It's making sure that you vent it, you tap it at the right time, and it's making sure that you do it at a time when you're going to sell it within 3 days as well. So it's a huge sort of logistical challenge to get these beers right. And the really best, the best cellarmen, they essentially understand their business, their turnover, and indeed their beers, the beers that they're buying, extremely well. And you can, the best way to learn whether you're going to have good cask ale is to look at the taps and see, if there's any tap badges turned around, which is what will happen when a beer is off. If that's happening a lot, that's probably not a good sign. But the best thing is if you can go into the cellar and see how organised and clean it is. If it's organised and clean, that probably means that the cellar person is really looking after what they're doing and understand it.
That's cool. Okay, so before we move to the next section, I would like to pay a little bit more attention to the dedicated dispensing system of cask ale. So Jonny, can you just briefly explain us how it works? I'm gonna for the next slide.
So I mean, when you look at it like that, it's mad, isn't it? So what you have, we call it a beer engine, and it's actually very, very simple, that element of it. So it is pure physics. You pull that handle at the very top. And that literally sucks beer out of the cask, and that's entirely manual. There's no machines, there's no pumps. That is human endeavor making that happen. When that pipe that says to the cask, that's leading down to the cellars, and it's going down to the actual cask itself, and that tap is then that line is going into the tap. And what you'll have is you'll have oxygen being slowly pulled in with every pint of liquid you pull out. I guess a pint of air is coming in with it. So you're slowly emptying that cask and bringing in oxygen. So it really is incredibly simple, but there is, little complications that we've sort of thrown in there. So the first thing is that increasingly we're seeing in the UK that people are using things called cask aspirators, which means that you're pulling in CO2 rather than oxygen. And Canberra took a long time to back that. They thought that it wasn't true. Sorry, its members, I guess, thought that it wasn't true cask ale dispense. But as consumption of cask ale has dropped, it's become increasingly hard to serve your beer within 72 hours. So what it means is less wastage, less chance for a bad pint, and I'm all for it. Like, ideally, we'd be doing it the traditional way, but the key is to get people drinking delicious cask. But we also have at the absolute opposite end of the system, where you have what's called the swan neck, which you can see the pipe that goes into the beer. That swan neck is there so that you can get the tap right to the bottom of the glass. So that you're not pushing all of the CO2 out as you pour it in, which is actually the goal, particularly with like Czech beers. The other thing that we often have is a thing called a sparkler, which is a thing that twists onto the end. It's a bit of plastic or a bit of metal that has lots of little holes in. And the sparkler essentially excites the beer inside that tap and brings out a load of CO2 from suspension, and it creates this really foamy, really soft carbonated beer, and that cascade that we see in cask ale and we see in Guinness. And there's a big divide in the UK as to whether sparklers are awesome and whether sparklers are terrible. But really, the truth of it is, it depends on the beer. Because, like I said at the start, you brew your beer specific to the dispenser that you're going to use. So some breweries, they brew for a sparkler, so it's probably slightly more carbonated, so you don't lose too much. The beer is generally perceived as being a little bit less hoppy once it's been through the sparkler. So often these beers are hopped a little bit more. And then the beers that aren't designed to go through sparkler will generally, they don't need quite so much CO2 in there. They don't need quite so much hop character in there. So you have to brew not just for cask, but for what you think the pub's going to do with it when they actually pull it through that swan neck as well.
Yeah, got you. And I'm not sure if I get this right, but I've heard that those in the north would prefer a sparkler rather than down south. Is that about right?
It's the story that people like to tell. I mean, what I would say is that 100% the north drink through a sparkler, almost exclusively.
Okay.
I think Northerners like to say that Southerners don't, but that's not really true.
Okay.
Sparklers, I mean, for one, Cornwall, so as far south as you can get in the UK, is mostly
Hmm.
sparkler.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's actually purely down to one guy who did a lot of brewing up north and came down to Cornwall, took over as head
Hmm.
brewer at St Austell Brewery, and made Tribute, which is one of the best and biggest cask ales in the UK. And he insisted on using sparklers. So as a result, Cornwall has sort of adopted the sparkler. But then equally,
Yeah.
you know, in London, I'd say probably one in four pubs will be using sparklers because just you know the
Okay.
publican or the customers prefer it. So yeah, you go to the north, it's almost certainly sparkler. You go to the south, it's
Hmm.
probably not, but it might be. So it's not quite the divide that maybe there used to be, or that people would like to
Yeah.
pretend because the story's good.
So the line is kind of blurry. It's not that super distinct or clear, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's increasingly distinct. And up in Scotland, again, it gets a little bit confused. So the further north you go in the UK, you start to see a lack of sparkler again. So
Okay.
yeah, like
Pretty
everything in this
bonkers.
world,
Yeah.
you hope it's
Yeah.
black and white, but it's really not. Yeah,
But it's, yeah, it isn't really not.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. All right. I think we now have a really good understanding of what cask ale is. Now I think the next thing to tackle is about let's touch on the history of cask ale and its ebb and flow throughout time in the UK. Can you
Mhm.
give us like the overview of what you have learned so far about cask ale in your country?
Yeah, so like I said, you know, historically, this is the way that most beer would have been served, certainly in the UK and particularly throughout sort of continental Europe at the very least.
Mhm.
You know, the UK, because of its empire and because of its sort of power within Europe, was one of the brewing powerhouses of the world. It had most of the biggest breweries. It was
Yeah.
exporting all over the world, and so we sort of created and other people adopted this method where you would mostly ferment the beer, put it into barrel, ship it to wherever it needs to go,
Mhm.
and the maturation would finish in that barrel. And then, actually, usually it would have been sent, say, to India, and it would have been bottled from the cask there, with however
Right.
much carbonation was sort of in there. So until the sort of the late 1800s, there was no other real technology for that. Um, Other examples of beer would have been, you know, it would have been going straight into bottle, or it would have been never cast or anything at all. It would have been drunk basically where it was fermented. So
Right.
that started to change as, you know, Central Europe, Bohemia, Bavaria really um, started to nail their lager brewing and started to export that, and indeed to export that technology throughout all of Europe. So most of
Mhm.
that came from Spartan Brewing and Pilsner Urquell,
Yeah.
you know, sharing their technologies, their processes, their ingredients, in particular the yeast from Spartan, which was used by Carlsberg. Carlsberg isolated it and then gave it out to the world for free in this mad
Yeah. Boom.
philanthropy that
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
one of the best things that's ever happened to beer and one of the worst things, because then beer started tasting the same. But you know, they wanted a new a new form of dispense that would, you know, create a more sparkling beer, a clearer beer, an easier beer to transport. And you know, so sort of capitalism did what it did, and it came up with a much more efficient process. And so that
Yeah.
kind of that kind of started to that put a timer on the future of cask. So the
Mhm.
real question, and historians have dug into this quite a bit, and I've never sort of got a definitive answer. The question is like, why did cask ale remain in the UK when
Mhm.
that method of serve almost completely disappeared elsewhere? And you do see it in, particularly in Bavaria, you occasionally see they'll serve lagers from oak barrels where the secondary
Okay.
fermentation has happened in there. You particularly see
Yeah.
it, I think, you know, the things that open Oktoberfest, that first barrel, stuff like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
they call back to that history, but they don't really do it in any meaningful way. In the
Mhm.
UK,
Mhm.
we do. It's still, even with the decline that it's seen, it's still, you know, it's still about 1 in 7, 1 in 8 pints poured in the UK as a cask ale. And if you go
Mhm.
to places like Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, it's, you know, probably pushing half of what's served.
Right.
So I think the reason that cask ale remained in the UK in the face of kegged beer is firstly that we didn't adopt lager in the ways that other nations did.
Mhm.
We stuck to cask ale right up until I think it's about the 1990s, really, where keg beer became more
Wow.
popular than cask ale. And I think that
Okay.
was because our heritage beer styles, bitters, porters, stouts, milds, didn't work half as well on keg.
Hmm.
So we were like, well, we'll have it on cask because it tastes better, it's smoother carbonation, all this kind of stuff. We also have to remember that, again, the UK was the brewing powerhouse of the world and had huge breweries that would struggle to adapt to anything new.
Hmm.
And then there's, I think, sadly, a bit of British exceptionalism where we're like, well, that's continental stuff. We don't do that. We're Britain. We're amazing. We do our own
Okay.
thing, which
Yeah.
is increasingly controversial as a political statement in the UK.
Yep.
But so that means that we sort of stuck by it. But that doesn't mean that it didn't struggle. So in the 60s, a lot of cask ale breweries were trying to create kegged ale. So they saw it as much more efficient, much cheaper to produce, much less wastage. And we did start to see, famously, beers like Watney's Red Barrel is this beer that if you say it to sort of a man over 50 in the UK, they're like, because it nearly sort of killed cask. So we had this huge
Okay.
consolidation of breweries as breweries closed. It was tough times in the UK. And on top of that, all of them were trying to make kegged ale. And so that's
Hmm.
where CAMRA came from, the Campaign for Real Ale. So they said, look,
Okay.
if we start kegging all of our ale, if we see so many breweries being bought out, closed, and consolidated, we're going to lose
Yeah.
that classic British culture that we have. And CAMRA in the late 60s, early 70s, and for the next sort of decade or so, did an incredible job of preserving that culture, of campaigning and educating people on the joys of cask ale, the joys of cask ale
Hmm.
culture, the importance of having small businesses, small breweries still creating beer rather than having
Right.
monopolies. And they essentially kept it from dying out completely. Like, we have to give CAMRA that credit. It was remarkable work done by all volunteers.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and then we had a company called SIBA start as well, the Society of Independent Brewers, that have continued that work. They were instrumental in a really important bit of legislation in 2002 called the Small Brewers Relief, where they essentially got tax reduced for small brewers, which started the craft beer revolution, but I think also saved cask ale as well, which was still struggling and still in huge decline.
Hmm.
So we basically, what we see is after World War II, cask ale falls off a cliff.
Right.
It's just about sustained because of CAMRA's work and then SIBA's work, and then post
Hmm.
2002 we saw a little increase
Hmm.
because of the Small Brewers Relief, because of a sudden interest in beer that came as a result of the cask ale revolution starting. But sadly, that hasn't really kicked on. I think we all got obsessed with American style beer, which doesn't work quite so well in cask.
Hmm.
And so craft beer didn't quite have the massive positive effect that many people hoped it would for the cask ale segment.
Hmm.
And then COVID was
Oh.
absolutely devastating for cask ale because for all because of all the technical stuff we talked about, you can only consume it
Yeah.
in the pub unless
Right.
you're a very
You
committed
have
home
to.
brewer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when the pubs closed in the UK, and they were closed or restricted for half of 2020,
Yeah.
that killed a lot of breweries. A lot of pubs stripped cask ale out, and that's where our idea for Keep Cask Alive came from, to try and encourage people when they went back to the pub after COVID to drink cask ale,
Hmm.
because we were worried that it would, it could be the death knell. And thankfully, it hasn't quite been that way. And actually, we're seeing a little cask ale overall as a category is declining, but we're
Hmm.
seeing sales of cask from small breweries starting to grow, which is very, very
Okay.
encouraging. So it could be a sort
Hmm.
of the rebirth of a forest after a fire kind of thing. That's what we're hoping.
That's. I mean, that's very one of the most fascinating stories, because it was born probably out of the necessity of what they have back there. The way they're gonna serve the beer right off the wooden barrel, and how to make it more efficient to serve it to more people. You need a certain handle, certain ways to pull them fast, certain way to preserve those greatness of the quality of the beer in the glass. And then when technology comes, it's kind of it may struggle a little bit somehow throughout times, and then you have those much more fancier systems, the cake style, the CO2 push, that's rival them from all around the globe, but it's still been protected, in your country. and with the help of camera, they help preserve it in a certain period of time until the present day. It's faced another challenge, which was COVID, that I completely forgot about. How it will,
I wish I
much
could.
of
Yeah.
kind of like have that kind of impact, because you have to have cask ale at the pub, right? Unless, like what you said, you are a very dedicated cask ale consumer that have the beer engine and cask at your house, which is pretty rare, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was one of those people, so I got so sick of missing cask ale that I homebrewed a best bitter and installed a handle on my coffee table in my lounge. But that's a lot of work and requires quite a lot of knowledge to.
And that was very inspiring.
It's one of the biggest and best things we've ever done on the channel. I think it really struck a chord with people, and it was really reassuring at the time, because I think it showed to me that there's all these worries about cask ale disappearing completely, and I don't think that's ever going to happen in the UK. I think that it is so ingrained in our culture that there will always be people producing it and always be people enjoying it. And the question that we always ask ourselves in our campaigning is, so where is rock bottom, and how do we recognize it, aim for that, and then try to bring it back up. But we don't think it would ever disappear completely.
So what I'm curious now is, from the modern day perspective, let's say, the current time being now, how is cask ale received in terms of the modern day beer consumer in the UK?
So annually there is it's run by Caskmark. It's called the Cask Ale Seminar, where all the sort of the big thinkers and a lot of the big brewers, sorry, not big brewers, but bigger brewers in the cask ale space, all come together to this amazing historic place in London called the Brewers Hall. And we discuss like the fate of cask, like what's come before, what's happening now, what can we do to help. And I've been going there for 4 or 5 years now. Had 2 years off in COVID, but so for the best part of a decade, I've been attending these seminars. And it used to be, the entire seminar used to be about how do we get young people interested in cask ale? How do we get rid of this cliche, this image that cask ale has had for a long time now, like probably from the 90s onwards, when in the 90s, when the kids who are, listening to Oasis and Blur, reading Loaded and Maxim, and they were all drinking Carling, Carlsberg, Heineken.
Right.
So that's when lager became cool and it became mainstream in the UK. So from that point onwards, basically, cask ale got this reputation as being we call pejorative. It's not a nice thing to call them, but we call them pale, male, and stale. So like white, old, and stale, not cool. Or we, just sort of call them the socks and sandals brigade. So people with not a huge amount of fashion sense. Although socks and sandals are getting cool now, so everything comes around. So it had this reputation of being for sort of older white guys in the UK, and it couldn't break out of that. And that was broadly accurate, if a little bit unfair, I think, on those people who are the people that actually fucking saved cask. So I'm always cautious about using those terms and meaning it. Like, I think they were incredibly important consumers in that, and did a great job. But that reputation has followed cask ale for a long, long time, and that's why it didn't get the pickup during the craft beer revolution that we really hoped it would. We thought it would be swept along with this amazing revolution, but actually cask ale was not seen as cool. It was not seen as modern, and the styles that went into it were seen as sort of boring and fuddy-duddy. There used to be this cliche of calling beer cask ale twiggy, because like American hop aroma was so vibrant, so fresh, so full of grapefruit and citrus and juicy kind of notes. And then English beer would smell of English style beer, so porters, bitters would smell of maybe a little bit of juiciness, because British yeasts are what go into New England IPAs, but mostly you'd smell the hops, and it would smell of hedgerows and spiciness and stuff like this. So we called it twiggy for some reason. But so going back to the cask seminar, what started to change is that we've recognized that what we used to see as an issue, in that the kids weren't necessarily interested in it, they thought of it as a little bit fuddy-duddy and a little bit old, is really an opportunity. Because actually what cask ale truly represents is something that's locally made, something that is more sustainable, because you're not using CO2. It's generally consumed locally.
Mhm.
It's from small independent businesses that provide, jobs and meaningful employment, and often are, a core part of their community, which you couldn't
Right.
say about AP InBev.
Yeah.
And it's an artisan endeavor, right? It is not something that has been commercialized and manufactured in a giant factory and shipped all over the world. It is something that is made specifically for an audience
Mhm.
by humans, not by machines.
Right.
So it is an artisan endeavor where hands are used, people sweat, agricultural ingredients
Yeah.
are used and celebrated as a result of the brewing of these beers. So
Mhm.
what we've started to recognize, and in the Cask Ale seminar this year, which was a couple of weeks ago, was this like genuine positivity around the fact, well, we have the right messaging for what young people want right now. They want a story, they want to consume local
That's
stuff,
great.
they want to believe a human made it.
Mhm.
And so for the first time in my memory, we have a way to tear this cliche down. And
Mm.
we have a way
Mm.
to explain to young people why cask ale is not just important historically, not just delicious, but also relevant to
Mhm.
their interests and their kind of
Mhm.
philosophies. So this is what we're trying to push now. And we can see a genuine interest in this kind of stuff in the beer space because, you look at, say, Guinness is made by Diageo. It's a huge brand
Yeah.
made all over, well, not made all over the world, sorry, made in 2 or 3
But
locations. But in
yeah.
Europe and America, it's all of it is made in Dublin. Um,
Mhm.
and that matters to people, right? Because they drink this beer Guinness, which it was nitrogenated to try and recreate cask ale's
Yeah.
texture.
Yeah.
They drink it because it is so specifically Irish, right? And when they
Mhm.
drink it,
Mhm.
they get this sense of Irish culture. They get this sense of Irish history. They
Yeah.
see this beautiful looking pint. They feel this remarkable, unique texture. There is a story behind this brand. You can see House of Guinness from Netflix now, this
Yeah.
multi-million-pound TV show that's being made by the guy that made Peaky Blinders,
Right.
telling the story of Guinness. This is exactly what cask ale needs to find a way to do. Like, I don't think there's ever going to be a Netflix special on the production of cask ale. I think probably the budgets that we throw into our stuff is about the peak of where it's going to get to, but the
Yeah. Yeah.
stories are there to be told in ways that we can do more organically in the beer industry. So talking,
Mhm.
less about, well, it's secondary fermented in the final container from which it's served and hand popped up from the cellar. Like, talking about this beer's bang fucking fresh. It was made
Yeah.
just down the road. It is part of our
Mhm.
history. It
Mhm.
uses amazing, whether it's American or British hops,
Yeah.
that have been grown by people who are passionate about this. We use the
Mhm.
malt of Norfolk and of Scotland, which is some of the best barley in the world,
Out there. Yeah. Yeah.
and has been celebrated by breweries all over the world. Telling these
Mhm.
stories will get people to go, well, I'll try a pint of it. And then you just have to
Mhm.
hope that it's been looked after and is fresh on the bar, which is that final challenge. But yeah, so
Mhm.
I think that cliche still exists about sort of older white guys in socks and sandals enjoying it. But I think
Mhm.
we've seen a way out, and we know that the messaging can work if we can get it right. And the fact that SIBA is saying that small brewers are starting to grow their cask ale
Mhm.
sales shows that a little bit of that messaging is starting to get through.
Well, I mean, like I couldn't imagine, like, because from what you have shared, it's been like, say, a decade of conference, and kind of like finally you start to see like the light at the end of the tunnel of where you can tap in to what can be considered as, I would say, a way to efficiently promote, the entity or the context of Cax Ale to, say, the new drinkers, and it potentially can match with the specification of what they expect. And I really like the word that you said, that it is made by human. It's mean artisan, crafty stuff, like for real, and it is actually what Cax Ale is since day one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So pretty cool. And I just have to just keep my eyes or keep hearing more about this kind of a story is going to be told from your team or the other organization that involved in preserving and promoting like Cax Ale.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's still going to be a big battle, and craft cask ale brewers are not particularly good at telling these stories.
Yeah.
They're often very reliant on traditional media. So, print magazines and sort of national papers and things like this, where those stories don't tend to come across quite so well. I think that video and social is going to be really powerful, and that that's how Guinness have done it. And you can see, particularly in the UK, I don't know if this is sort of true elsewhere, but there is a real deep love for pubs that young people have. Even all the cliches that young kids aren't really drinking anymore, and they're certainly not drinking cask ale or stuff like that. Even if that's the case, they still love pubs, because pubs in the UK, at the very least, are the only remaining truly public spaces that
gathering
are,
places.
Yeah, exactly. They're warm, they're cozy, they invite frivolity. You can be yourself in them, whereas you can't necessarily do that in a coffee shop. You certainly can't do that in a coffee shop late. The weather's shit in England. You can't just go to the park all year round. So, pubs have this really important role. And even if they're going there and having a low alcohol beer or a soft drink or even a coffee, young people treasure these pubs. And I think that there's a real opportunity for cask ale brewers to promote that as well. Because there is no pubs without cask ale, and there is no cask ale without pubs. Like their destiny is entirely entwined. And there's so much social media, like where's the best pub in this town? 5 most beautiful pubs in the UK, this kind of stuff that could involve cask. And we need to be better at getting it in front of those people and that are, literally making livings championing pubs, but not mentioning cask ale at any point yet.
So, I mean, like, there's one question that pops up in my head right now. It's like, you don't see, I'm not really sure of this. I just assume that you don't see cask ale advertisement during the football game, right?
No, certainly not during football. So cask ale does have this quite symbiotic relationship with rugby. So
okay.
Most of the local rugby clubs will be sponsored by their local breweries. Same with cricket as well. Cricket is a very cask ale.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's different sports. But, there are no cask ale breweries really that have the budget to sponsor a national team or the Premier League or anything like that. But you do see it in other sports, and you do see it in grassroots football as well. So in Keep Cask Alive, we did part of the documentary was Harvey's Brewery, which is quite a small regional brewery, but they are the main sponsor of their local women's team, Lewis FC, and they are also a small sponsor of Brighton FC. So, Premier League football club. And they've done they are one of the best examples of a brewery that does know how to communicate, I think. And they have lots of benefits, from being a heritage brewery that hasn't changed a lot in 120 years and this kind of stuff. But they understand the power of that. And they worked with us, so they understand the power of video and telling those stories. So it's a very hard space for small brewers of the UK to compete in, but grassroots sport and rugby and cricket at a higher level, they are managing to do it, and that's super important because beer and sport. Yeah, again, in the meaning of beer, I wrote a whole chapter about beer and sport and how they've propped each other up in America, and it's true in the UK as well.
It just surprised me that cricket and rugby, are the ones that kind of is the face of cask ales. I always thought of UK with football, and just curious about it.
It's weird and backwards, and there's probably a book or an article in the idea, because football is very much the working class sport, right? And cask ale is perceived as the working class drink, and yet nobody really goes to a football ground and drinks cask ale. But all the ex-public school kids that love cricket and rugby are all drinking cask ale. So it's a weird mix-up, and I think that's where again, I don't want to come across too anti-capitalist, but I think again it was financial power that created that. I'm sure there's lots of people that would love to be drinking cask ale in Premier League football grounds, but they've been pushed out by the Heinekens and the AB InBevs and such. That contradiction's never quite occurred to me until this moment. It is a bit wild.
Very interesting. Indeed. At this point, I believe that we have a pretty good overview of the current state of cask ale in the UK, and you may not kind of time flies. You may not know that we've been in this conversation 45 minutes now, and we are already at the tail end of the session. So I think it is good time to bring the attempt to preserve cask ale through your initiations. With to get the cask ale recognized by UNESCO. Jonny, can you touch on this project and how I mean, you already lightly touched about it, like how it all started, but what made you what motivate you to keep on going, and what is the current status of the campaign?
Yeah, so like I said, we started Keep Cask Alive, which is our series about cask ale in 2021 to try and encourage people going back into pubs for the first time to drink cask. And while we were filming that documentary series to try and encourage people to do it, we sort of started thinking that it was such a drop in the ocean what we were doing. We knew that we'd reach, 500,000 people with this documentary, but that's not enough to save cask ale by any stretch of the imagination. And we looked at, the good work that SIBA, CAMRA, and then other organisations like the British Institute of Innkeeping, the British Beer and Pub Association. There's so many organisations lobbying the government, and all of them are pro-cask. So what could we do that they couldn't? And the one idea we had was this UNESCO campaign. So what happened was in 2016, or maybe 2018 actually, Belgium got their beer culture recognised by UNESCO as what's called Intangible Cultural Heritage. So it's not, the Taj Mahal and Stonehenge and these kind of things, these physical manifestations of like either culture or environment. It's stuff that is often written down or it is enacted by people. So it's dancing, it's certain traditions to do with politics or storytelling. It's to some extent production of stuff. So with the Belgian submission, it very much focused on the styles that have been created only in Belgium, on the fact that it's always served in the correct glassware, on bottle re-fermentation, on brown cafes, so these beautiful old cafes in the cities that are kind of unique to Belgium. So it was everything that was sort of hard to touch or pin down, but created this entirely unique kind of culture. So we thought, well, why has nobody ever looked into this? And at the end of that series that we put together in 2021, we basically said on camera, we were like, we've had this idea, we've got no idea how to go about it, but let's put it out into the world and see if anybody has any knowledge, and we'll try and make this happen. We very quickly got an email from a lawyer at York University. He said there's a really good reason why this hasn't happened yet, and that's because the UK government hasn't ratified that element of the UNESCO treaty. So it's literally impossible to do in the UK. And I do believe that CAMRA did have a look at, after the Belgium success, they did have a look at it and went, oh, we can't actually do it. So we spoke to some politicians and to some lobbyists about it, and I don't think we had any impact on this at all. But basically, pretty much the last act of the previous government, the Conservative government in the UK, ratified that element of the treaty after a very short consultation period, which I think made a lot of sense because, it's a way of celebrating our culture in an entirely uncomplicated way. You don't have to be waving St. George's flags and shouting about immigration. You can just go, we have cultural things that are worthy of note and worthy of protection. So I think that's why the Conservative government decided to do this. And we very quickly kicked into action after that. So we've been sort of sat on our hands for about a year, but we're like, right, so that's been ratified, so this can happen now. So we very quickly went to a bunch of sponsors and got a new series commissioned. And as part of that, I started working pretty hard on lobbying and getting people involved. So we got the backing of all of those institutions I mentioned, like the BBPA, the BII, CAMRA, SIBA. Approached every politician I had the email address for and asked them about it and asked if they'd support it. And we made quite a lot of headway. So we started making that documentary series, Keep Cask Alive 2, and promoted what we were doing. And off the back of that, the main thing we tried to get was a petition going. So the UK government has a pretty amazing little system where anybody can start a petition. And if it reaches 10,000 signatures, the government will respond. If it reaches 100,000 signatures, they'll have a debate in Parliament. And that petition has just closed. We've been promoting it hard for 6 months. We got 40,000 signatures. So we got a response from the government. And they said we would welcome a submission on Cask Ale. But more importantly, like we were hoping to get to 100,000. We didn't get anywhere close in the end. But what that did is open doors. So I'm now talking to MPs and to civil servants pretty regularly about this campaign. There's a lot of MPs that really want to see it happen. There's a lot of government ministers, so people high up that really want to support this because they understand what hospitality puts into the economy, into people's mental health, but also they understand like that it's supporting farmers, that it is a huge source of tax revenue. So we've got interest from a lot of different departments in this, but it's still not going to be easy. So we've done this petition, which A, got us in front of the government, but B, it's evidence that we can use when we go to UNESCO of what's called community buy-in, which is an important thing that UNESCO will look at. And so the process from here is, firstly, we have to get what's called a national listing or national living heritage. So this is where the government decides what is culturally important. And that window to apply should open in the next couple of months. They said June this year, then they said August, then it said September, and now we're in October. So it should be opening anytime soon. And hopefully we will get recognition on that. They've essentially said to us that it will, because it's an absolutely obvious example of intangible heritage. So we're not trying to protect the beer engine or the cask itself or the beer styles, some of which are already protected through PGIs, so protected geographical indications, saying this is a unique thing to this location. What we're trying to protect, our definition is cask ale and the places that serve it. So it's the British pub, but also it could be, say, that football stadium that Harvey's sell cask ale in. And it is, the breweries and the culture that surrounds it. So to some extent, it's the unique beer styles. To some extent, it's the pubs that serve it. It's the people that serve it. It's the breweries that make it. It's the distributors that sell it. It's traditions like delivering by horse. It's British hop growers. So hop growers, if you think cask ale is in trouble, British hop growers is on another level of crisis. And we've done a lot of work on the craft beer channel to try and help reverse, their fortunes as well. So it's protecting everything that feeds into the beer engine.
The making of cask. Yeah.
And so once we get onto that national list, which we're fairly confident we will, then one example of intangible heritage a year can get forward to UNESCO. So I've started work on the assumption that we will get national listing. Started work on lobbying MPs to say beer should be put forward first. Cask ale should be put forward first. And that's tricky in the UK because there's 4 nations within the UK. We need to give them all an equal showing. There's always complications around promoting alcohol, and some MPs are slightly reticent about that. So it's going to be a big lobbying campaign around saying, A, cask ale is in all 4 of the devolved nations. It's not like, say, Morris dancing, which is very unique to certain parts of the UK and probably should remain so. And it's also saying that this is one of the most important symbols of Britain, the pint. This is of huge cultural value and huge financial value to the nation. So it should be put forward first. And if we get selected, then that will be a year of my life I'll never get back. It will be all in making essentially a book, which is loaded with cultural evidence, academic evidence, that community buy-in, so proof that the community, and by that we mean the country and indeed the industry, want this, and pulling all of that together to create a submission that UNESCO will then look at and either approve or not approve. And that's a much higher bar than the national listing, so it's a lot of work. Right.
So, it is very obvious that you, Brad, and other people in this campaign has done tremendous tons of great jobs so far, and still the road is still ahead of you, and there are a lot of more jobs that you have to just motivate yourself, keep it going, keep pushing to the finish line. And from what you share, I view it as like you are already way beyond the halfway mark, but the road is not that smooth. But yet, I put my heart out there for you guys to make this campaign accomplish, like, to the end. So it is very amazing to hear this kind of stories, and how one of the small group of people, individuals who has this, I think it's more than passion, it's like a part of their life that intertwine with the tradition of how, I would say, one nations prefer the way that they enjoy their life, and gonna celebrate it through the pubs, through the unique serving system, and the beauty that become, the nature of how you drink beer or ale. And yeah, I understand that those Belgians got one, and say in the next year, in several years, in this near future, you guys will also receive another one too. I mean, like 1-2 for you guys. So that's going to be the second one in the UNESCO. So that's what I really,
I
hope for. Yeah.
I should say that I think the Czech Republic is further down the line than us into getting their beer culture recognized. So hopefully we'll be number 3.
Okay.
And they've done some great work. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the time we get asked, what real difference is this going to make? And we don't really know for sure, but just that recognition, because beer is obviously a controversial thing for politicians to champion, right? I understand that, because we understand the effect of alcohol on the body. But in any decision, any public policy decision, and indeed in our decisions in our lives when we consume things that aren't necessarily that great for us, we have to have both sides of the story, right? We have to be told that alcohol does this to your body, particularly in larger quantities, but equally, what is it doing for you on another level? There are so many studies, and these will be going into our submission for UNESCO when the time comes, about how pubs combat loneliness, how pubs create communities, and how beer is, whether the health, people wringing their hands about the public health want to admit it or not, alcohol is a part of that, and cask ale is the biggest part of that. Alcohol has been used for 13,000 years to bring humans together, and will be used for another 13,000 if we don't burn this planet. And we need to protect the people that produce it responsibly, locally, sustainably, with heart and with their hands, or else we lose the ability to truly monitor it and to truly consume beer in a responsible way. And pubs and cask are key to that.
Yeah, I hands down for that. I think it's very important message that we must convey and keep them relevant, to the next and next generation. So yeah, I think it's one of the really cool and great campaign.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, the past several minutes, we've been spending a little bit intense, conversation discussing about the campaign, and sure, it is important, and we can't finish this session without touching about that campaign. And we are at the finishing line now, and I have only one last question left. Probably more like a favor than a question to you, Jonny. Just to put like a cherry on top of the ice cream for this dessert question. I would like to ask you to share me or share with some of us the recommended cask ale producing breweries and pubs that shouldn't be missed according to your preference when, say, I will visit England, UK.
Yeah. Well, I would say that probably most people who come to UK will be coming through London. And if you do, you should do a Fuller's Brewery tour, because although it's a very modern brewery now in many regards, they've kept a lot of the old stuff in place. So it's quite an interesting tour. And the beer is phenomenal. People were very worried when Asahi took it over, but they've done a great job thus far. I'd say Harvey's is an absolute must. Particularly if you can get a tour. The owner, Miles, does tours on Saturday mornings still. So it will be the owner of the brewery that will take you round. He'll take you to the sample room and give you as many, delicious beers as you want. And that place is like a museum, the equipment, some of it is centuries old. and they produce incredible beer. And Lewis as a whole is a beautiful, historic British town. I'd also say you should go to Leeds and visit a brewery called Kirkstall, which is owned by a guy called Steve Holt, who has done incredible work preserving recipe books, old advertising, paraphernalia like old mugs and this kind of stuff. And that's all on show in his tap room, and they make magnificent beer, and they have a whole series of they call them prize ales, so like old historic recipes that they brew and serve on cask. And while you're there, make sure you go to a Timothy Taylor's pub, because Landlord is probably the best cask ale I know. Landlord is just a magnificent beer, and you shouldn't leave the UK without trying it. And because of the work they've put into training, it's usually the best pint on the bar, even in a bad pub.
Wow.
So a pint of Timothy Taylor's Landlord has to be on the list.
So we have Fuller's in London, and then down south is Harvey's, right? In Lewis, Sussex, right?
Yep.
And then up north to Leeds, which nearby has Timothy Taylor's. And what's the other one again? The one that started with a K, right?
Kirkstall. Yeah.
Kirkstall.
Which is in central Leeds, yeah.
Okay. So those are the breweries. Say in London, if I'm going to visit, say you, where would be the number one Cask Ale pub that you would bring me there?
I think for the quintessential experience, you'd have to go to the Harp in Covent Garden, which is a beautiful old historic pub that serves great cask ale, and it's like walking back in time. But another shout out to an incredible place called The Hope, which is down in Carshalton, so the suburbs of London. There's not a lot of other reasons to go to Carshalton, but The Hope is one of the is one of the best pubs in the world. Like serious dedication to great cask and to lots of different styles in cask. During I think it's just during like the warmer months, they have a cask ale festival every Thursday. Every Thursday with like 20 new casks tapped, and they get through it all by the weekend. Yeah. And amazing food as well, and it's a beautiful old pub. It's truly like it's the pub of my dreams, but it actually exists. It's an amazing place.
All right, I have them noted on my list. So yeah, definitely. If I'm gonna be there one day, hopefully soon. Yeah, those are the places.
You let me know. We'll go for a pint.
I'll surely tap you in.
Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent, Jonny. And I think this is where we will end the session. Again, I would like to say thank you so much for joining us today. Not only guiding us down this fascinating road of cask ale, but also share with me and us, the audience, this valuable thought and works that you have put through the attempt to preserve cask ale to this, modern day and age. I really appreciate that and look forward for the good news from your team.
Well, thanks for having me. And hopefully there's good news in a couple of years.
Yeah, hopefully. All right, cool, man. I think it's time to send you back to your day now. Thanks again, Jonny. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers. Bye. Okay, folks, here you have it. The unique beauty of British cask ale. It's I would say it's the culture, the tradition that is, that worth saving in my point of view. Not only that, the ale and beers that are served via this particular type of serving method are delicious, but the aesthetic part of having them served in a proper manner. Plus, if you really think about the roots of how each component are, I would say, being nurtured, or the blood, sweat, and tear that each individual puts into the creation of cask ale, from the ingredients of growers, the awesome barleys, all the UK hop growers, the way that they make the way that they brew the beer locally to promote, I would say, the craftsmanship of of the neighborhood and serve them to the pub that, probably sit right in the corner of the breweries, and let the resident around that place enjoy the entity or the context of what they have in the region. Those are the awesome thing. And I mean, if this is the first time that you ever, hear about Cask Ale, or you've heard it before, but you've never had a chance to taste or try it, my advice is probably hard in Thailand, but there are sort of places you can find the place. If you don't know them, you can message me. I'll show you the way. But just go out there, find some, give them a try. It will not be a disappoint. It will not be I'm pretty sure it will not create a bad memory for you. Even if the beer in the glass is not your cup of tea, but the experience will surely impress you for sure. So that's all for today's session. The Good Burp session will be back in no time, so stay tuned. Until next time, cheers and sawadee krap.